The sharpest pain is not the bullet that tears the flesh, but the betrayal that pierces the heart. What would you do if the two people you trusted most plotted your downfall, not with open violence, but with a slow, silent poison meant to erase you without leaving a trace? Would you fight them with anger, or would you rise above their schemes in a way they could never imagine? This is not a tale of easy choices or simple revenge. It is a story of shattered trust, of betrayal dressed as love, and of a man who refused to be broken even when everything inside him screamed to give up. As you listen, you will find yourself questioning not only what you would do in his place, but also what true strength and dignity really mean. Before we begin, if you want more stories like this, full of suspense, emotion, and unforgettable turns, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button to support us, and in the comments tell us from which city you are listening tonight. Your words make this community alive. Now take a deep breath, relax, and let us start this journey. But before we begin, if you enjoy powerful, thought-provoking stories drawn from real lives, tales of love, betrayal, mistakes, and second chances, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a like and hit subscribe. It helps others discover this corner where life itself writes the most dramatic scripts. And share with me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? It's always fascinating to see how these stories travel across the world and connect us all. Now take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's step together into a story that just might change the way you look at life. He took the marble steps as if they were part of a ritual, one palm on the rail, the other holding red roses wrapped tight. Langston Royce judged anniversaries by effort, not dates. Tonight he wanted quiet light, warm food waiting, and a simple line he had rehearsed in his head. 5 years, and I still choose you. The house answered with soft air and distant ticking. He pictured Sarai Monroe turning at the door and smiling the way people do when they want to be admired but not surprised. At the landing he slowed. From the master suite came a low exchange, too careful to be casual. He leaned toward the seam of light. Sarai spoke first, her tone flat and steady. He thinks it's just fatigue. A second voice followed, smooth enough to shine. Cassius Red said, "The heart is already stressed. A few more weeks and no one questions it." Langston felt the roses bite his palm. He told himself he was mishearing, that stress could bend words into threats. Then came a phrase that left no room for doubt. Sarai said, "Same dose in the evening tea." Cassius answered, "It dissolves clean." The bouquet shifted. A head of a rose snapped off and rolled against the baseboard, a small sound that carried like a flare. He saw himself in the door handle, steady body, shaking hand. The room beyond smelled faintly of jasmine and something medicinal. He pushed the door. Silk sheets lay rifled. A lamp warmed the edges. Sarai stood by the bed in a robe, hair loose, eyes quick with calculation rather than shame. Cassius rose from the chair, shirt open, that unserious smile he wore to cheat gravity. On the nightstand sat a tea set, a glass vial without a label, a narrow spoon arranged with the neatness of routine. Langston tried a sentence and heard a stranger say it. "Poison?" Cassius didn't blink. He said, "Cleaner than chaos." Sarai lifted her chin as if delivering a conclusion, not a crime. She said, "You were always too trusting." He looked at the roses in his hand, then at the bottle, and understood how long the play had been running without him. Gifts, trips, late calls Cassius had taken for him, each favour now bright with new meaning. Sarai's comfort on hard days felt suddenly like a study, not a touch. He set the bouquet down and felt thorns rake his skin. The sting cleared his thoughts. This was not an argument to win. This was a room built to swallow him. He stepped back, then another step, measuring the space between breath and disaster. Cassius moved toward the nightstand, not fast, just certain, like a man collecting a tool he had already priced. Langston turned and ran. Carpet swallowed his steps for 2 strides, then the hallway opened and the house returned his speed with a rush of stale air. Behind him a drawer slid, metal on wood, followed by the hard click that meant a plan was done, pretending. He cut left, roses dropping in a red trail across the floor, a private parade for a ceremony that would never happen. He reached the nearest small door and threw himself inside, twisting the lock with a quick loud snap. The room was narrow and tiled. Above the sink his reflection stared back. jaw tight, eyes wide with the kind of focus people mistake for calm. In his pocket, the phone felt heavier than any weapon. He pressed a number and forced his voice to obey. "Come now, armed intruders." Outside, a hand hit the door. A second hit followed, harder. From the hall, Cassius called through the wood with a leisure that sounded like a smile. "Open up! No need to suffer!" Another hit shook the frame. From farther back, Sarai's voice carried, brisk and bored. "Finish it!" The lock strained. He planted a shoulder under the knob and braced the hinge with his heel. The line clicked as the operator spoke, and he gave a name that still belonged to him. Somewhere in the house, a window banged, a draft folding the curtains like a wave. The door shuddered again. He watched the handle twitch, then stilled, as if the house held its breath with him. He heard feet retreat, then the rustle of drawers, then a silence that was too neat. A minute later came a new sound from outside, faint but rising, promise turning into fact, sirens. The door relaxed against his shoulder. He didn't. The lock rattled once more, and then silence. Langston Royce pressed his shoulder against the door, listening for movement, waiting for the rhythm of retreat. He dared to breathe, thinking the intruders had lost nerve, when a sudden thud shook the frame. Cassius Red's voice came clear, steady, and cruel. "If the poison won't finish it, the bullet will." Langston's pulse surged. The sound of wood splintering followed, and through the thin crack of the door he saw Cassius raising a pistol, the steel catching the lamplight. Langston yanked the handle, forced the door open just enough to slip past, and ran into the corridor with the weight of betrayal pressing on his chest. Behind him the first shot cracked, echoing down the marble hallway. The bullet tore through glass, shattering a framed portrait into fragments that glittered as they fell. He sprinted past the staircase, gripping the railing for balance. Each shot chased him, one striking a crystal vase that exploded into shards, another punching a hole through canvas, sending paint flakes swirling in the air. The home he had built as a sanctuary was now a battlefield, each artwork turned into a casualty. Langston ducked into a smaller guest bathroom, slammed the door and locked it with trembling hands. His reflection in the mirror looked foreign, sweat on his brow, jaw clenched, eyes burning with disbelief. He pulled out his phone and spoke with precision. "Armed intruders. Send security, now." He forced the words through tight breath, knowing every second mattered. The pounding on the door came once, then again, then stopped. Silence followed, broken only by Sarai's voice drifting closer, impatient, sharp. "Enough noise. We leave." Cassius answered with a short curse, but his steps receded. Langston leaned against the sink, straining to catch every trace of sound. Then came the faint slam of a back exit. Minutes stretched like hours until flashing lights painted the walls through the curtains. Security entered with weapons drawn, followed by officers in uniform. Langston opened the door at last, hand still clutching the phone as if it were the only lifeline left. They swept the rooms, noting the broken frames, the roses scattered like spilled blood, and finally the vial on the nightstand, small, unmarked, half full of pale liquid. An officer lifted it carefully with gloves. "Microdoses," he muttered. Another added, "Cardiotoxin, hard to trace." They photographed every detail, the torn canvas, the shards of glass, the neat placement of the poison. Evidence was no longer whispers. It was visible, undeniable. From the doorway stepped Bishop Caldwell, his suit marked by rain, his gaze steady. He placed a hand on Langston's arm and leaned close enough that only he could hear. In a low voice, calm yet heavy, he said, "We have enough for conviction, but conviction will not give you peace." Langston did not answer. He stood among broken art and roses crushed underfoot, knowing the pursuit was not over. The house grew quiet after the officers left, but silence felt heavier than the gunfire had. Langston Royce walked the halls alone, shoes crunching over glass and the curled edges of a ruined canvas. His eyes stopped at a single hole in the plaster wall, the bullet's dark imprint fixed like a cruel signature. He stood before it as if it were a mirror, his own reflection hidden inside the wound. For years he had built his life on elegance, on control, on the certainty that order could protect him. Tonight, all that remained was proof that love could turn into a weapon. He thought of Cassius with the pistol steady in his hand, of Sarai's voice instructing patience like she was discussing a shopping list. The image burned, begging for retaliation. But Langston knew violence would only drag him into their world. He whispered into the quiet room, "My revenge will not be blood. It will be creation." The words steadied him more than the lock on any door. At his desk he found the roses again, wilted and broken. He gathered them into a vase, not because they could be saved, but because he needed to believe that even crushed beauty could still be arranged. In that act, his mind shifted. They had wanted his stigmas, his death as a footnote. He would answer by building something louder, undeniable. The phone rang. On the screen glowed a name from another part of his life, Victoria Larkin, a producer with a reputation for shaping stars. Her voice, sharp and commanding, filled the room when he answered. "Langston, I need you. We're assembling judges for the Crown of Grace. The world's watching and we need your name on the panel." He listened, almost ready to refuse. The contest was a spectacle, not the kind of stage he valued. Yet, as she explained, he saw a line connecting chance and purpose. Sarai had always craved the stage, the lights, the applause. To see someone else rise where she had expected to shine would cut deeper than any bullet. Through another's success, he could reclaim his own dignity. He agreed. His voice carried no hesitation. "I'll do it." Victoria promised details would follow within hours, her tone brisk as always. "Pack light. The flight leaves at dawn." The call ended, leaving the house hushed again. Langston looked once more at the bullet hole, then at the roses. In both he saw a choice, destruction or rebirth, and he had already decided. Morning brought the drone of engines and the pale light of travel. He sat by the window, the world stretching beneath him, a line of clouds hiding the ground he left behind. For the first time since the betrayal, he felt distance working in his favour. Each mile separated him from poison and bullets and carried him towards something he had not expected, a chance to fight with light instead of darkness. The plane descended hours later, wheels striking the runway with a firm jolt. He moved through the terminal, past faces that blurred toward the car waiting for him. Soon the glass doors of a grand hotel opened, spilling light across the polished floor. Travellers hurried, voices echoed, and chandeliers glowed above. He adjusted his jacket and carried himself forward, unaware that fate was already arranging a meeting he could not predict. At the edge of the lobby, he turned toward a side corridor and stopped. A service door swung open, and from the shadowed space beyond came the faint sound of quiet sobbing. Langston glanced toward it, roses and bullet holes still haunting him, and stepped closer to the source. Langston stepped through the narrow service door, leaving the glitter of the lobby behind. The air inside was heavy with detergent and faint perfume, the kind of space where elegance was only a rumour. There, crouched beside a stack of folded linens, sat a young woman in a simple uniform. Her hands covered her face, shoulders trembling with the effort of hiding sobs. He paused, not wishing to intrude, but her words slipped between sobs and caught him still. She whispered to herself. They laughed again, said I should scrub their shoes next. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong anywhere anymore. The confession was too raw to ignore. Langston cleared his throat gently. She startled, brushing tears away, revealing striking features framed by curls damp from crying. She was young but not fragile. Her eyes, even red with grief, carried depth. Her name, she said quickly, was Naima Wells. She worked housekeeping here, long shifts that paid less than the weight she carried. The contestants she had served mocked her, flaunting gowns she would never wear, treating her silence as weakness. But as she spoke, Langston heard something unusual. Every phrase was precise, every pause carried rhythm. She told him she once studied theatre, had been chosen for a role until classmates set her up with false accusations. Her scholarship collapsed, her father's health failed under the stress, and she left her dream to send money home. Langston listened more closely than he expected. Her grief carried cadence, her pain shaped into sentences that held the weight of performance without trying. He saw in her not just sorrow but a raw stage presence, the kind that could not be rehearsed. Naima tried to laugh through her tears, saying softly, "Now, I just memorize cleaning schedules instead of scripts." Yet even then she carried herself with quiet poise, her back straight despite the uniform, her voice clear despite the trembling. He remembered the bullet hole in his wall, the promise he made not to answer betrayal with destruction but with creation. Before him stood not just a broken dream, but the embodiment of the chance he had been seeking. He did not speak immediately, But in his silence her story unfolded more, how her father's operation left debts, how her evenings ended with exhaustion, how she believed the stage had closed forever. In that moment, fate pressed Cloten. From the hallway outside came the hurried steps of staff, and the sudden announcement whispered between them. One of the Crown of Grace contestants had withdrawn after a family emergency. A vacancy had opened where none should have existed. Langston's mind sharpened like glass catching light. Here was the symbol, the chance to build something out of ruin. He looked at Naima, still clutching a crumpled tissue, unaware of the opportunity just created. He saw the quiet strength in her, the way dignity lived beneath disappointment. He knew the choice before him was not just about revenge, it was about giving voice to someone the world had tried to silence. Langston extended his hand, his tone steady. Naima, what if I told you the stage isn't closed? What if you had 3 days to prove them all wrong? Her breath caught, eyes widening, torn between disbelief and the faintest spark of hope. She did not answer yet, but in her silence he already heard the beginning of a new script. The next morning Victoria Larkin arrived sharp and brisk, heels cutting across the marble floor of the rehearsal suite. Her gaze swept over Naima, still in her uniform, eyes swollen from a night of doubt. You cannot be serious, Langston, she said, arms crossed. 3 days is not a makeover, it's a death sentence. Yet she lingered, studying Naima's posture, the curve of her neck, the natural clarity in her voice. She knew the press adored impossible stories, the girl with a broom stepping into a crown. It was a gamble, but spectacle was her business. With a clipped breath she added, Fine, but if she fails, it's on you. Langston did not flinch. He introduced Naima to the team that had polished more than one contender into brilliance. Gabrielle Dubois, the stylist, circled her with the artist's impatience, pulling fabric against her skin, matching tones to her complexion. Capsule wardrobe, Gabrielle muttered. 4 looks, strength, grace, allure, vulnerability. She sketched with speed, her hands moving like scissors even before the cloth arrived. Isabella Rossi, posture coach, tapped her cane against the hardwood floor. Stand, Naima obeyed. Awkward at first, shoulders rounded from years of quiet labour. Isabella pressed a hand between her shoulder blades, lifted her chin. The body remembers dignity, she said, voice stern but not unkind. Hour after hour, Naima walked the marked lines on the floor, balancing books, correcting her stance until each step began to settle into rhythm. Marco Santini, the photographer, set his lens and watched her with disarming honesty. The camera does not love perfection, he told her. It loves truth. At first she stiffened, uncertain, but as flash after flash burned the room, Naima began to relax. Her eyes met the lens not as an intruder, but as a witness. Marco lowered the camera, nodding. There it is, he said quietly. She's not pretending. By evening, the suite was littered with fabric swatches, empty coffee cups, and the buzz of possibility. Naima stood before the mirror in a fitted dress, hair pulled back, makeup light enough to reveal rather than hide. She stared at her reflection as if meeting someone she had lost years ago. Gone was the uniform, the lowered gaze, the careful silence. In her place stood a woman who looked capable of walking onto any stage without apology. She whispered, not to anyone but herself, I can. The words cracked but held. Langston, watching from across the room, felt something inside him shift. The bullet hole, the betrayal, the shattered roses, all the fuel for revenge suddenly faded against the sight of Naima's first belief in herself. He realized with a clarity that startled him. This was no longer about hurting Sarai or Cassius. It was about ensuring Naima's victory, not as a weapon, but as a declaration. As the team packed up, he lingered by the window, city lights flickering outside. He admitted silently what he could not yet speak aloud. His cause had changed shape. The revenge he sought was dissolving into something far more dangerous. Hope. The day of the press presentation arrived with a tension thicker than the velvet curtains framing the stage. Contestants lined up in glittering dresses, each face painted into perfection, each smile sharpened into a weapon. Among them stood Naima Wells, her gown simple but refined, her posture earned through hours of correction. Her hands trembled at her sides, but when the lights flared she lifted her chin. Reporters filled the hall, flashes stinging the air, questions hurled like stones. Background, training, Sponsors, contestants replied with polished speeches rehearsed 100 times. When Naima's turn came, murmurs rippled across the rows, some curious, some mocking. She took the microphone with both hands, steadying her breath. "I'm not from wealth," she began. The room quieted. "I worked in this hotel as housekeeping. I folded sheets and carried trays. Honest work is never shameful. And I'm here now because I still believe in the stage I lost." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried weight through its calm. For a moment, silence. Then a wave of whispers, sharp and cutting. Some clapped politely. Others laughed under their breath. One rival muttered just loud enough, "From mop to crown, how convenient." Another hissed, "Langston's pet project." The words spread fast, like smoke finding cracks. Langston Royce sat at the judge's table, every camera ready to capture his reaction. He felt the trap closing, accusations of favoritism, the whispers of conspiracy. He rose slowly, drawing attention, and leaned to the microphone. His voice cut through the noise. "To keep this contest fair, I withdraw from the panel." Gasps followed. "I will not judge, only observe. Let her stand on her own." He placed his badge on the table and stepped back. The hall stirred with surprise. Naima looked at him, shock and gratitude mingling in her eyes. He gave no signal, only the quiet assurance that she was not here as anyone's pawn. From the audience came a sudden hush of recognition. This was no ordinary contestant, and this was no ordinary story. But in the crowd lingered another kind of silence, heavier, dangerous. A man in a cheap suit tapped his phone, his grin too satisfied. Outside the hall, a tabloid already prepared its headline, sharpened with malice. Her past, the scandal in her theatre school, the father's debts, every wound she had confessed, was about to be poured into the world not as truth, but as gossip. Langston left the stage certain of one thing. Tonight's applause had bought them only hours before the knives of rumour began to cut. The following day, the contest shifted into its most ruthless territory, the stage where appearance spoke louder than pedigree. Contestants lined backstage in bright swimsuits, each of them shimmering under powder and light, rehearsing steps that were more mechanical than natural. Naima Wells stood among them, her hands pressed briefly together, breathing through nerves that threatened to shatter her poise. She remembered Isabella's steady hand at her back and Marco's reminder. The camera does not love perfection, it loves truth. She carried those words like armour as the curtain lifted. One by one, the women paraded across the stage with fixed smiles, hips swaying to choreography practiced into muscle memory. Applause came in scattered bursts, polite but unmoved, the audience watching with expectation rather than awe. Then the announcer called her name. Naima stepped forward, light spilling over her, and for the first time in years she did not shrink from it. Her walk was not exaggerated, not forced. Each step was measured, smooth, carrying a rhythm that seemed to grow from her rather than be drilled into her. Shoulders relaxed, chin level, her gaze touched the crowd without fear. The camera lenses snapped frantically, not because she was flawless, but because her movement felt unguarded, real. In a hall filled with carefully rehearsed beauty, her natural composure looked radical. The audience stirred. Murmurs turned into gasps, then applause that began with a few voices and spread like fire. By the time she reached the end of the runway, people were on their feet. The judges leaned forward, whispering among themselves, eyes locked on a contestant who had entered the stage with no pedigree, no polished background, yet held their attention with ease. When the walk ended, the contestants were lined up for the interview segment. Each received a question meant to test wit and public grace. Most replied with slogans polished to glitter, words about unity, about dreams, about beauty being power. The answers rolled off their tongues like advertisements, neat but empty. Naima's turn came. The question was sharp, designed to expose weakness. What is the greatest challenge for women today, and how would you solve it? She could have chosen safety, a vague promise. Instead, she spoke with a voice steady and unhurried. The greatest challenge is being told you must hide your scars to be worthy. We are measured against illusions, and when we fall short, we are told we do not belong. I believe strength is not about erasing pain, but carrying it with dignity. I do not want to solve women's challenges with words alone. I want to show that honesty is power. Her words cut through the hall like a sudden note of music. For a moment, no one moved. Then the applause returned, louder, real. One judge leaned back, shaking his head with a smile. That is a voice that carries experience. Another wrote furiously on her notes, not trained, but authentic, a presence that resonates. Backstage after the segment, the air buzzed with envy. Rivals whispered about luck, about manipulation, about how long she could possibly hold on. Yet Naima, exhausted but steady, allowed herself a small smile. For the first time she felt not like an intruder in borrowed light, but like someone who had carved out her own space on the stage. Langston watched from the shadows of the wings. He had promised himself not to interfere, but he could not deny the surge of pride that swelled in him. The sound of the crowd rising for her was louder than any bullet he had heard in his hall, more healing than the silence that had nearly ended him. What had begun as vengeance was becoming something unshakable, belief in her. As the contestants were dismissed, Victoria Larkin approached with her sharp, assessing gaze. She surprised them, she admitted, voice clipped. But tomorrow is different. Tomorrow is the creative number, and that stage has buried stronger women than her. Langston asked what Naima had chosen. Victoria answered with a raised brow. She refuses music, refuses dance. She wants to stand under a single light and speak. A monologue. The risk was staggering. Without song or choreography to distract, every flaw would show. The stage would either break her or reveal her completely. Langston felt the weight of it, and yet he saw in her eyes later that evening not fear but resolve. She knew what she carried inside, and tomorrow she would let the world see it. The creative round arrived, and with it came an atmosphere more charged than any before. Contestants prepared with music, choreographed dances, and dramatic costumes meant to overwhelm the stage. Backstage sequins glittered, instruments tuned, and assistants buzzed around with last-minute corrections. Among this storm of spectacle stood Naima Wells, dressed in a simple black gown that flowed to the floor. No orchestra, no props, no choreography, only her voice. The announcement came and she stepped into the light. The stage was stripped bare, no backdrop but shadow, no sound but the hum of the spotlight. She stood center stage, hands at her sides, and lifted her eyes to the audience. The silence before her was heavy, thick with anticipation and doubt. Many expected failure, a collapse under the weight of emptiness. Then she began. It was not a speech of hollow phrases, but a monologue pulled from Chekhov, words chosen for their honesty, for the way they revealed humanity without decoration. Her voice trembled on the first line, but then steadied, gaining rhythm, gaining depth. Every pause carried intention. Every glance upward seemed to open a door inside her. She did not perform the text, she lived it. Pain, longing, dignity, all spilled from her with a clarity that struck deeper than rehearsed charm ever could. The hall grew so still that even cameras seemed to soften. No one coughed, no one whispered. Judges forgot their pens in midair. The audience was no longer watching a contestant. They were witnessing a woman resurrecting her truth. By the time the final line left her lips, tears glistened openly in the crowd. Applause did not come immediately. Instead, there was a stunned quiet, a moment where no one wanted to break the spell. Then the hall erupted, thunderous, standing, people clapping until their hands ached. Backstage whispers turned into disbelief. Rivals stared, realizing they had just witnessed a moment that could not be rehearsed away. For them, the competition had been about gowns and gestures. For her, it had been about breathing life into silence. Langston Royce, watching from the side, felt something shift inside him that he had not expected. He had begun this journey with vengeance in his heart, determined to wound Sarai and Cassius by lifting another to glory. But as Naima stood in that single beam of light, carrying a hall of strangers into her grief and her strength, he realized this was no longer about revenge. This was love, not born from spectacle or desperation, but from seeing someone reveal their soul without fear. It had come quietly, almost invisibly, and now it anchored him more deeply than his anger ever had. When the round ended, the contestants were called forward. The announcer's voice echoed as the names were read for the final 5. Each pause stretched longer than breath. One by one, the chosen stepped forward until 4 places were filled. The last name fell, Naima Wells. The hall erupted again, a storm of applause and surprise. She covered her mouth with both hands, stunned, then bowed her head as if the weight of hope had suddenly become real. Yet not all eyes celebrated. From the far side of the hall, hidden half behind a marble column, a figure watched. Sarai Monroe stood there, disguised in a sleek coat, dark glasses concealing her stare. In her hands she held a folder, documents prepared with precision, forged to cut Naima down just as her star began to rise. Sarai's lips curled into a faint smile, not of joy, but of resolve. The celebration on stage drowned out the danger gathering at its edges. The corridors behind the stage were narrow, lined with crates and tangled wires, the kind of place where glamour never reached. Naima Wells slipped away from the noise of celebration, needing a breath before the weight of the final day. Her heels clicked softly on the concrete, her hands still trembling from the announcement of her name. She bent to steady herself, whispering almost in disbelief, "Final fee?" From the shadows a voice answered, sharp and familiar. "Final 5 for now." Naima straightened. Sarai Monroe stepped forward, her coat falling open to reveal the sleek dress beneath, her sunglasses gone, eyes bright with calculation. The elegance on her carried no warmth. She blocked the narrow passage with calm, as though the encounter had been rehearsed. "You think you've earned this?" Sarai asked, her tone smooth as glass. "You're nothing but his instrument, his weapon to humiliate me. Without him you would still be scrubbing floors." Naima swallowed, but her spine remained straight. "Without him I wouldn't have had the chance. But chance isn't victory. I walk that stage myself." Sarai's lips curled into a sharp smile. "You believe this will end well? The press loves a rise, but it feasts on a fall. If you step down now, if you lose gracefully, you save your face. If you win, the world will strip you apart, and I will see to it." The words landed heavy, designed to puncture the fragile shield of hope Naima had built, yet she did not move back. She thought of the monologue, of the audience rising, of Langston watching with something more than strategy in his eyes. She thought of her father, of the debts that weighed on her, of the years she had buried her own voice. "This is not your story to end," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "It's mine now." Sarai's expression hardened. She lifted the folder she carried, tapping it lightly against her palm. "Then you've chosen your ruin." She turned, her heels clicking like a clock counting down. The corridor swallowed her in shadow, leaving Naima standing alone, heart pounding but unbroken. That night's sleep came to shallow tours, broken by flashes of her rival's words. By dawn, the contest hall glittered with preparations for the final day. National costumes, evening gowns, and the closing speech that would decide everything. Contestants moved like soldiers readying for battle, their faces masks of confidence hiding storms underneath. As the audience filled the seats, as judges shuffled papers somewhere in the press section, a notification lit a screen. Sarai had already played her hand. A tabloid headline laced with venom spread across phones and whispered from one journalist to another. Naima's past, the failed scholarship, the scandal she'd been framed for, the debts, was no longer a secret. By the time she stepped on stage, the room would not only see her beauty but carry questions sharpened into weapons. The battlefield had shifted. Tomorrow's fight would not just be on the runway, it would be for her very right to stand there at all. The final day began with the parade of national costumes. The stage burned with colour as contestants stepped forward draped in symbols of heritage, feathers, fur, and fabric, turning the runway into a living canvas. Applause echoed with each entrance. Yet when Naima Wells appeared in her deep-toned attire, there was something quieter but stronger in the way the crowd reacted. Her walk was calm, her expression composed, as if she carried not just a costume but the memory of every step that had led her here. She passed the first test without falter, her confidence intact. Then came the evening gown round, a storm of sequins and satin designed to dazzle. Rivals shimmered beneath chandeliers, rehearsed smiles fixed in place. Naima entered in a gown of silver that caught the light like water, her hair swept elegantly, her stride steady. Where others sought to blind with brilliance, she brought stillness. By the time she reached the judges' table, the audience was on its feet once again. But just as the air thickened with anticipation for the final announcement, a new sound pierced the hall. From the press section came a shouted question, loud enough to halt the ceremony. Is it true the crown was bought for you, that you are nothing more than Langston Royce's revenge?" Gasps rippled through the room. Phones lit up, headlines already circulating, the tabloids' poison spreading like wildfire. The other contestants smirked in thin victory. Judges shifted uncomfortably, the stage suddenly colder. Naima stood frozen for only a heartbeat. Then she stepped forward, microphone steady in her hands. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear. "It began as revenge. I was offered this chance not because I demanded it, but because someone wanted to turn pain into a weapon. But that is not who I am now. Do not judge me by how I entered this stage. Judge me by what I have done on it. Judge me by the woman I have become in front of your eyes." The hall stilled, a pause long enough to fracture. Then applause broke, hesitant at first, then rising until it drowned the whispers. She had not denied the scandal. She had transformed it into proof of growth. From the side of the stage, Langston Royce stepped forward, no longer content to remain a shadow. His voice was calm but resolute. "It's true. I brought her here as part of my own pain, my own fight against betrayal. But tonight, this is not my story. It is hers. And I am proud to say I love her, not as a symbol, but as the woman she has revealed herself to be." The crowd erupted, not with scandal, but with support. Judges leaned back, nodding, relief flickering across their faces. For the first time in the contest's history, truth had stolen the spotlight more powerfully than any gown or performance. Naima lowered the microphone, her chest rising with the weight lifted at last. She turned, and the hall clapped not just for a contestant but for a voice that had refused silence. Yet beyond the applause waited another reckoning. As Langston and Naima walked toward the exit, hand in hand, the glow of victory surrounding them, figures in uniform appeared. The hall hushed once more. Officers stepped forward, voices low but firm. "Sarai Monroe, you are under arrest." From the crowd she tried to shrink back, but Bishop Caldwell's steady figure emerged, his eyes locked on her. It was his information, his persistence that had closed the loop. Sarai's forged documents, her flight from justice, her schemes, it all collapsed under the weight of law. The hall that had just cheered Naima's triumph now watched as betrayal was led away in handcuffs. The stage was reset for the final verdict. The 5 remaining contestants stood beneath the glittering lights, each one masked by a perfect smile while nerves coiled beneath their gowns. The air felt sharpened, every second dragging heavier than the last. Judges whispered among themselves, papers shuffled, and then the announcer's voice rang out, clear and deliberate. 5th place was called, the name echoing through the hall as one woman stepped forward, smile trembling, bowing to applause that sounded polite but not fierce. 4th followed soon after, her tears barely contained as she curtsied and exited the stage. The hall grew quieter, the tension focused on the 3 who remained. Naima Wells stood with her hands clasped before her, eyes lowered for a moment, then raised with a calm born of exhaustion and faith. 3rd place was announced. Another contestant stepped forward, her relief mixed with disappointment. The spotlight narrowed to 2. Naima and her final rival waited, the hall crackling with energy. The announcer drew the pause long, letting the suspense choke the room. Then at last the name fell. Naima Wells, Crown of Grace. The sound that followed was like thunder. Applause erupted, cheers rising, the hall on its feet. Naima covered her face with both hands, overcome by the weight of it. A tiara of silver and crystals was set upon her curls, the sash draped across her gown. She trembled, but she stood tall, not as a housekeeper pulled from obscurity, but as a woman who had fought for her own dignity. When given the microphone, she did not stumble. Her voice was steady, warm, carrying to every corner of the hall. "I was not supposed to be here. I was told I had no right, no place, no voice. But tonight, I stand as proof that chances, even when they come from broken places, can still bloom into something greater. I dedicate this crown to anyone who thought their story had ended. It is never too late for a second breath, never too late to begin again." The applause swelled again, tears visible in the crowd. Langston Royce, watching from the edge of the stage, felt his chest tighten with a pride deeper than victory. He stepped forward, not with ceremony, not with grand words rehearsed, but with quiet resolve. He took her hand, turned her gently toward him, and spoke with no microphone, only his voice carrying across the hush that fell. "Naima, I don't care about crowns or headlines. I care about you. Will you stand with me beyond this stage?" Her eyes widened, the crown glinting as she looked at him. She whispered, but the hall heard, "Yes." It was not a performance, not a spectacle. It was truth spoken simply, and it was received with roaring approval. The lights flared brighter, confetti fell, but even amid the celebration Naima understood what this moment meant. The crown was not an ending. It was the beginning of a heavier responsibility. She turned once more to the audience, her voice firm. "This is not just my triumph. This is a platform. What we do with it matters more than winning it." And in that vow, the hall felt the shift. The story was not closing. It was opening to something larger. A year later, the crown was no longer the centerpiece of Naima Wells's life. It sat in a glass case at the foundation office, a symbol rather than a prize. What mattered now was the work it inspired. The Second Chance Foundation had grown from an idea into a movement, built to support young people with talent but without access, those who had no elevator to carry them upward. Scholarships, mentorships, and workshops flourished under her name, not because she sought fame, but because she remembered how it felt to be told the door was closed forever. On this evening, Naima returned as an honoured guest to the same hotel where her story had begun. She no longer wore a uniform. Instead, she walked with the quiet elegance of a woman who had learned that dignity did not need applause to exist. The staff greeted her warmly, not as an outsider, but as someone who had proven that beginnings never define endings. At her side walked Langston Royce. He was no longer the man haunted by betrayal and bullet holes. His expression carried a steadiness that came from healing, his hand resting over hers as though the gesture had always been natural. Together they moved through the hall, past chandeliers and polished marble, until they reached a corridor both of them remembered. The service door stood slightly ajar, just as it had a year earlier. Naima paused, a smile tugging at her lips. That room had once held her tears, her doubts, her surrender. Now it was nothing more than walls and shelves. They walked past, and outside on a small bench near the entrance lay a bouquet of fresh white roses. Langston noticed them first, bending to pick them up. White, not red, the colour of renewal rather than passion. He handed them to Naima without a word. She cradled them carefully, sensing that the flowers were not for her alone. They were an invitation, a sign that another story was ready to begin. They continued walking, the sound of their steps soft against the polished floor. Neither looked back. They no longer needed to. What had started as vengeance had reshaped itself into creation, a cycle that promised more than pain. It promised transformation. The night outside glowed, not with fireworks or applause, but with the simple hum of life carrying forward. As they stepped into that light, hand in hand, the image of betrayal that once defined Langston's nights was finally erased. In its place stood something larger, love, purpose, and a foundation that turned broken beginnings into open doors. The story closed not with revenge, but with renewal.